Hi, number two on relationships, body life, and God making us in his own image. After Adam was created in Genesis 2, God said, "It's not good for the man to be alone." So it kind of raises a question. Did God make a mistake in creation? And we know from our study of the scriptures that God's perfect. So absolutely not. But when he created Adam, he had a plan from beginning for Adam to be in relationship with God and mankind to be in relationship with God and mankind to be in relationship with one another. And this small group, this community here, Adam and Eve and God, was a prototype here of how God delighted to relate to the people he made in his image and how they were to relate to one another. Um, in Adam and Eve's relationship, there were originally no barriers to God or between themselves. They created those barriers later on with sin. Adam could say to Eve, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Um, Moses could write in Genesis, "The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." There was a perfect harmony there. There is a belonging. There is a perfect relationship with each other and with God. There was no fear. There was no separation, no alienation between themselves and between their relationship with God. They lived contented because they had a perfect community. But we all know what happened. Eventually, Adam and Eve became discontented. Instead of um, keeping that community life with God and proper relationships with each other, they tried to live independently, and things began to disintegrate very quickly. They rebelled against God and His will. They sinned. Um, they rebelled against the rules of relationship for God, with choosing to go their own way instead of God's way. And the result of their sin and rebellion was not just separation from God, but it was alienation from each other. There was now shame. There was blame. There was barriers within themselves. And Scripture says the eyes of both of them were open and they realized they were naked. And then they began to sew fig leaves together and cover themselves. They were ashamed. They were afraid of God. They tried to hide. And when God comes to um, have fellowship with them as he walks in the garden in the cool of the day in Genesis 3, they hide from God. And God says, "Where are you?" And the answer Adam gives, "I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And so this community was shattered. Instead of contentment, now there's disagreement, there's contention, there's a broken relationship. Instead of harmony, there's hatred. Instead of the things that they shared, there is shame and a clinging on to what they wanted to preserve. And that's the story of humanity, isn't it? You see this also in Genesis 11 and Genesis 12. Man continues to rebel. They create their own kind of community, but apart from God, wanting to be independent from God, wanting to go their own way. And they say, "Come, let us build a city with a tower that reaches the heavens. Let's make a name for ourselves," in Genesis 11:4, because so that we're not scattered over the face of the earth. And God understands that their attempt at community without God being at the center would destroy them, because God has made us to be in relationship with Him. He is a zealous God. He is a jealous God, and He will not allow our communities to have a perpetual time of keeping God distant from our own attempts here. And so He prevents the building of this tower. And through the rest of Scripture, we see humanity's empty attempts at trying to create these trying to look for community, but trying to do it without God. And the result is, because of the selfish bent of our heart, they always fail. Countries, civilizations, um, communes, you name it, they ultimately always fail. There is not one that has perpetually existed, because ultimately they lead to further rebellion from God and separation from one another. And the end result is despair. There's a songwriter who tried to express this with his song called "Homesickness" by Soul Asylum, and you can listen to the deep longing here to wanting community, but yet looking for it in the wrong places. He says this: I want to live with you in the fifth dimension in a dream I've never had. But just because I can't live like this in a world like this, I just want to kiss goodbye. We're not of this world, and there is a place for us stuck inside this fleeting moment, tucked away where no one owns it, wrapped up in haste and by mistake thrown away. I am so homesick, but oh, that's not so bad because I am homesick for the home I've never had. That's the heart of mankind, looking for a place to belong, but looking for a place to belong without God at the center. And the only way that homesickness is going to be satisfied is through Jesus Christ, who brings us near. Ephesians 2 says, brings Jew and Gentile to himself. He has made peace through the blood of his cross, Colossians says. And when he does that, he brings us to an eternal God, and he brings us to an eternal community, eternal family, all those who have experienced the saving faith of Jesus Christ.